According to legend, this magnificent abbey was founded by Margrave Leopold III on the spot where his wife's unscathed wedding veil was found, 9 years after it had been blown away by a gust of wind following the couple's marriage. Today, the Klosterneuburg Abbey is a pulsating Austrian landmark where religion, culture, and viticulture have been harmoniously interwoven. The splendid Abbey Church is not only the focal point for the religious life of the resident Augustinian canons, but also a cultural treasure of immeasurable dimensions.
The foundation stone for the Abbey Church was laid in 1114, and it was completed and consecrated in 1136. Originally, it was a Romanesque church that stood here. In fact, we still have the Romanesque foundations, and the walls are largely the Romanesque ones. It was reconstructed a few times. We've had several different, for instance, several different towers. And in 1689, it was converted into the Baroque in the interior. And since then, we have these spectacular choir stalls and the high altar, which were designed by Matthias Steindl, a famous Baroque artist and designer of the period. It's been here, we've been praying and worshiping in this church now for almost 900 years. It's a real landmark. Originally it was meant to be, in fact, probably a cathedral, but it never got that far. The main organ of the Abbey Church is significant because it's the oldest organ in Europe still in its original housing. It was created in 1645 under commission from Provost Bernhard Weiss of the Abbey, who was our abbot at that time.
Created in the early 12th century, this exquisite seven-armed candelabra was part of the original furnishings of the Romanesque Abbey Church. Its form makes reference to the biblical genealogy of Christ.
The Verdunner altar was made in 10 years by the medieval artisan Nicholas of Verdun. He was on his way back from Byzantium, and stopped here, and the chapter commissioned him to create what would be actually 3 sides of a pulpit from which he would preach. And he created this masterpiece of enamel work of the period using the techniques he learned in Byzantium. And it was then put into the Abbey Church. 200 years later, it was reconstructed to be an altarpiece as we see it today. Above it, you can see a reliquary made in 1936, which holds the bones, the relics of St. Leopold, patron of Austria. This room was originally the first chapter house of the monastery, which is the second most important room in any monastery. And Leopold was originally buried here after his death, and below the altar is also buried his wife and many of his children, actually, because the chapter house was also a burial place. Probably in the Middle Ages, the main occupation of the canons was copying books, aside from some small pastoral duties. The garden was to be a symbol or an image of the eternal paradise for which they were preparing themselves. We're blessed to continue to have, or to still have, our medieval buildings, because in many Baroque monasteries they would have been torn down to make way for new buildings.
Today, the Abbey can indeed still boast a number of original and imposing architectural features, one of the most prominent being the Sala Terrena. An innovatively designed visitor reception hall enhances the never-completed 18th century garden room. The Atlantes were created by Lorenzo Mattielli.
The St. Leopold's Peace Prize is sponsored by the Abbey every year for artists from around the world who have engaged themselves socially in humanitarian activities. And it's one of the most important prizes in the Austrian art world.
The Klosterneuburg Abbey is deeply involved in pastoral, cultural, and humanitarian activities. Truly a venue where heaven meets earth.